There is perhaps no unbiased source of information on the internet. But the casinos of Las Vegas, Nevada, provide us with a unique way to evaluate who is going to win and who is going to lose the upcoming presidential elections in the United States of America, and we can be sure that they're not politically biased. Ultimately, there's just an overweening financial interest that the casinos have in making money. This was the week when Bernie Sanders tumbled from being a major contender for the presidency of the United States of America to being so unlikely to win that his odds are, in a word, laughable. To put this in perspective, the odds on Andrew Yang winning right now are plus 1,500. So with this system of arithmetic notation, plus 1,500 means if you go into a casino in Las Vegas and put down a $100 bet on Andrew Yang, and then Andrew Yang wins the presidency of the United States, your prize, your winnings, will be $1,500. So this reflects an underlying political analysis that it is extremely unlikely that Andrew Yang will win the presidency. And if he does, you could become fabulously wealthy by just gambling a few $1,000s betting that he'd win. The odds that Bernie Sanders will win the presidency of the United States of America as of October 8th, 2019, are plus 2,000. Even worse than Andrew Yang. So if you bet $100, that casino in Las Vegas is now willing to give you a prize of $2,000 if Bernie Sanders should manage to win. I think Elizabeth Warren has really been competing in the shadow of Bernie Sanders to a greater extent than most people appreciate. Bernie Sanders set himself up as both the respected and odious representative of socialism. And then Elizabeth Warren was seen in that context as the more moderate, more reasonable, non-socialist representative of fundamentally the same policy goals. So Bernie Sanders was going to use the big S word, socialist, and Elizabeth Warren would say that she is, quote, a capitalist to her bones. So these were seen as two different paths leading to the same place, one more moderate and reasonable, one more radical and uncompromising. And of course, a lot of people who are still disaffected with or disappointed with the Democrat Party of the Obama era were obviously enthusiastic about taking the more radical road. Because under Obama, they voted for change, they voted for hope, and they got the status quo, and they got nope. However, I think you have to concede the point that Bernie Sanders was never really playing to win. He never really was committed to thinking of himself as the next president of the United States. He was never willing to make the sacrifices ultimately that just have to do with his own ego. And the use of the word socialist is a very instructive example. Okay? If you walk into a grocery store and say, I want to buy a bag of greasy, dehydrated corn niblets, they'll send you to the popcorn section. Okay? There's a reason why it's called popcorn and not greasy, dehydrated corn niblets. Bernie Sanders could have, at any point, swallowed his pride, set aside his commitment to the very unpopular label of socialist, and accepted that he has to package his policies in the way that Elizabeth Warren already was packaging hers. Bernie Sanders wants more taxes on the rich. Elizabeth Warren wants more taxes on the rich, higher taxes for the rich. Bernie Sanders calls it socialism. Elizabeth Warren calls it capitalism. What would you rather buy? Greasy dehydrated corn niblets or popcorn? Let's get real here, people. If the difference between these two things is Bernie Sanders' ego, why couldn't Bernie Sanders have had the humility and detachment to recognize his political position is further to the left than the vast majority of Americans? His political position is further to the left than the majority of members of the Democrat Party. And even worse, his political position is further to the left than the minority of members of the Democrat Party who actually attend and participate in the presidential primary process. Okay? So guess what you got to do, Bernie? You got to eat your humble pie and come up to the podium, and when you're asked about your past support for communist Russia, your past visit to communist Russia, you should say, I realize now that was bad and wrong. When you're asked about your past use of the word socialist, you should have the humility to say, I realize now that was bad and wrong. And you should come out and say, firmly, with conviction and clarity, that what you represent for the future of the United States is no more socialist than what governments have already accomplished in Canada, what governments have already accomplished in Denmark and Sweden. Those countries are not socialist, they're not communist, and that's what you want poor people in the United States of America to have, is better health care, better access to education, blah, blah, blah. Right? You could have done this, Bernie. You could have, if you were really playing to win. Right? And you weren't. Okay? You didn't really take it all the way, did you, Bernie? And now, at great length, after great efforts, you've been pretty much eliminated from the race. I think nobody else has told you, Bernie, that you have in large part, in this way, been eliminated by your own hubris. And there was a very different kind of hubris, Bernie, when you were campaigning against corruption, you were campaigning against crony capitalism, but you were still supporting the dairy industry. You were still supporting the beef industry in a manner that you would have perceived as corrupt if you were criticizing a Republican for doing the same things. You were out there supporting quote-unquote family farmers, wanting more taxpayers' money to be handed out and line the party of those dairy farmers. You had the nerve to come out and say the United States of America would be better off if it adopted Canada's system of stuffing taxpayers' dollars into the dairy industry. Whoa, have you got it 180 degrees the wrong way away there. Whoa. America's system is bad, but Canada's system of subsidies for dairy farmers is even worse. Idiocy. And that idiocy, Bernie, is the same hubris that resulted in you refusing to even consider a vegan diet. And you should have adopted a vegan diet. If you had adopted a vegan diet, you wouldn't have been a hypocrite about ecology, you wouldn't have been a hypocrite about subsidies for the meat and dairy industry, and you would not have had this heart attack that's had an absolutely crucial role in basically eliminating you from the contention for the presidency of the United States. Right? So coming back to my main premise here, Elizabeth Warren is only now emerging from the shadow of Bernie Sanders, where she has been seen in that shadow. She's in a sense been protected from criticism by the shadow, because she's been seen as representing the same policies, but without the socialism, without the radical overtones. Okay? How many people have actually read her complete policy document, her complete list of plans? I started reading it today. I'm going to read it so you don't have to. I'm going to come out and make a YouTube video about it probably tomorrow, possibly the next day. I'm going to go through it and take notes, and I'm going to tell you what I think. But I started reading it today, and let me tell you something. A lot of these plans are so vague that they can be summarized as a bunch of platitudes with maybe one line of tough-talking rhetoric floating around somewhere in the middle. The Elizabeth Warren plan on foreign policy is, it's time for our troops to come home. I'm not kidding. You know, it's got a couple paragraphs of text. That's the only sentence fragment that counts. Nobody's been cross-examining her or really questioning her on this because, again, until recently, she was in the shadow of Bernie Sanders and she was just presumed to be a less radical version of the same objectives. Well, Bernie Sanders talks about dramatically reducing the military budget. We've just seen, again, to give the precise date, today is October 9th, 2019. We have just seen the ludicrous backlash from both the left and the right when Donald Trump tries to take our troops home from Syria, from a war for the future of Kurdistan that the American public has no interest in pursuing. And both the left and the right are telling him he's dead wrong to bring his troops home. It's never been a harder time to be a pro-peace candidate in America. What is really meant by Elizabeth Warren's very vague commitment to bring our troops home? What does that mean for the conflict in Yemen? What does that mean for the very real and ongoing conflict between Israel and Iran, which is not a Cold War and is not a phony war? It's a very real ongoing war that stretches out territorially between Israel and Iran, including territory of Iraq and Syria right now. There have been aerial bombardments. There are armed men on the ground. The armed men are giving interviews to Reuters, to the mainstream press. It's a war that's unfolding as we speak. And the left of center press, including the New York Times, they all want to pretend that Iran is baseless hysteria. It's not. Donald Trump may not know what he's talking about, but left-wing news sources like the Young Turks also do not know what they're talking about on the Iran versus Israel issue. And we could go down the list. A huge number of conflicts all around the world that America has gotten a toe into, or sometimes you've put in the whole leg. What is she really committed to? War comes at a terrible price. Peace comes at a price also. Do you want to abandon Afghanistan? Yes or no? If America abandons Afghanistan, the Taliban will take over. And the Taliban will literally burn down the women's colleges, the women's schools, the female equality educational institutions that American taxpayers created. They will burn the ballot boxes. They will destroy the basis for democracy in that country, and there will never be elections in Afghanistan again. There will be no more freedom of speech. They will revert to a totalitarian form of government, and the whole world is going to sit there and watch. And the Taliban, they upload to YouTube. They're going to film it and put it on the internet, and they're going to laugh at the failure of American imperialism. They're going to burn the flag, and they're going to throw a party. I don't think there will be cocktails. I think that'll be an alcohol-free party. And then you know what they're going to do after that? They're going to become the world's major crossroads of both opium production and terrorist training. And there's a little saying in Afghanistan. You may not know this about Afghan culture. Quote, I waited 100 years to take my revenge, and still I acted too soon. Afghanistan is a vendetta culture. Their vendetta against the United States will never end. And you know what? It won't just be the Taliban that has that vendetta. It won't just be your enemies. It'll be the allies that you abandon. You know what? American war in Afghanistan, deeply morally flawed, sold to the American public on a totally false rationale, totally false set of reasons presented to the public for why America should fight it. But you know what? The position you're in now is you've created a very delicate secular democracy. It's just barely secular. It's just barely democracy. It just barely exists. And it's surrounded by fundamentalist barbarians who want to tear it down. There will be a price in blood. War is expensive. Peace, also expensive. Right? And I don't know what Elizabeth Warren's position is. Nobody knows what her real position is on any of these issues. I think it's understandable. People have been cross-examining Bernie Sanders. They've been cross-examining Donald Trump. They've been cross-examining Joe Biden. And only now is Elizabeth Warren really going to emerge from those shadows and face the kind of scrutiny and cross-examination that any candidate taken seriously in the election honestly should face. Okay? So Elizabeth Warren right now is the odds-on favorite to win. The Vegas odds for Donald Trump are plus 125. Makes sense because he's already in office. The odds for Elizabeth Warren are plus 250. The odds for Joe Biden are a big step back at plus 700. Okay? Elizabeth Warren more likely to win than Joe Biden, according to Las Vegas, Nevada casino odds, okay? Then Andrew Yang at 1,500. Then Bernie Sanders at plus 2,000. The odds of Bernie Sanders winning right now are even with Pete Buttigieg, which is to say the likelihood is almost nothing. There are a lot of morals to this story already, and the story ain't over yet. Guys, in politics, if you're playing to win, it takes personal commitment. You have to be clear about matters of principle, but it also takes tremendous personal sacrifice. I think Bernie Sanders could never have won because he wasn't willing to make those sacrifices.